Sweet corn on top, richly seasoned meat underneath. Today, we're making pastel de choclo, one of Chile's most comforting baked dishes. We start with the pino, our savory filling. Medium heat with a thin layer of neutral oil, we add a generous amount of minced onion. This will form our savory base and provide some subtle sweetness. We cook to evaporate the water content, concentrating the sweetness we just talked about. Gentle heat without browning. We're not looking for caramelized sweetness, so lower the heat if need be. Season with salt. This will also help draw out the moisture. And take your time. This can easily take 10 to 15 minutes, but it's the foundation of the dish. Once you can no longer smell even a hint of raw onion harshness, there's not much steam coming out, and your pot looks a bit like chopped lemon jelly, we're ready for the optional garlic, which will give us a bit more savory depth and a bit more sweetness. Just like the onion, the raw harshness will fade, and it goes in later because its structure makes it easier to burn. Once the smell has gone from raw garlic to sautéed garlic, we're ready for our beef mince. If time permits, I suggest adding bit by bit, breaking it up in the process. This will prevent the beef from flooding our pan with moisture, allowing the earlier batch to develop some complex, meaty flavor via the Maillard reaction. Some modern recipes suggest a meat-first approach for better browning, which is an option as long as you lengthen the simmering time accordingly. I personally prefer treating this more like a filling than a meat sauce, so we solve for texture and a shorter cooking time. We cook just until the last batch is no longer pink, but it's up to you to decide what flavor profile you prefer with corn. Now, depending on how fatty your mince is, you have the option to skim and reserve the excess fat before we introduce our spices. But I think today we look okay. So now the spices. Cumin, the earthy backbone of our filling. Traditionally, you would add ahi de color for color, earthiness, and a bit of sweetness, or mercan if you want it hotter and smokier. For the supermarket, your best bet is sweet paprika. Goes in later as it's quite heat sensitive. We want to extract the fruity sweetness without the bitterness. Once the fat has taken on this beautiful fat-soluble color, water goes in. Just enough to barely cover, so we don't have to reduce aggressively to make our filling. We adjust the salt. You want this to be on the slightly saltier side, about 1% of the weight of your mince to balance the sweet topping we're about to make. Optional black pepper for some earthy heat. Gentle simmer, about 20 minutes. Once you have this juicy yet cohesive texture, and bearing in mind this will spend some time in the oven, we're ready for the star of the show, the pastelera, a topping made with a local Chilean corn variety that is more starchy and less sweet. With supermarket sweet corn, we need to make a few adjustments. 1, we control the moisture by sweating it whole in quite a bit of butter. Because we'll be blending and reducing it later, this step will save you a lot of time, especially if you're using frozen corn like me. The skin will protect the natural sugar from caramelizing or burning. Which brings us to point 2, sugar control. Traditional recipes calls for the addition of sugar to the corn mixture. With supermarket corn, we skip it entirely. That's why we didn't add the traditional raisin to our beef filling. Classically, you would also sprinkle sugar on top before baking. We replaced that with the addition with a generous amount of butter, hoping the milk solids would help us with the desired browning. Once that wave of steam has somewhat subsided, meaning we've driven off quite a bit of moisture, milk goes in. Once again, we cook the evaporate a bit before blending to have more control. Now, fresh and dried basil are both quite common in Chilean recipes. The characteristics that differentiate the two are quite heat sensitive. So for the purpose of this recipe, unless you already have a plant, I recommend using dried and use it quite sparingly to give us that signature herbal perfume. Now, our final adjustment, the lack of starch. At the very least, we thicken this with a starch slurry. But if you want to go above and beyond, ground dried maize, which has many names in many countries. The most notable is probably cornmeal. This will bring a slower release of extra starch and a lot more texture. We cook to gelatinize the starch and thicken our mixture. Season with a tiny bit of salt, then we blitz, however you like. You want to aim for coarse paste, so not too fine. Now, if it's already holding its shape, you're good to go. Otherwise, very gentle simmer. Now, let's make a pie. Of course, you can make the filling the night before to make life easier. We taste both to make sure we have the sweet and savory contrast that we desire. Top up with salt if need be. We add our optional cooked chicken thigh meat, hard-boiled egg, black olives for more contrast, both in terms of salt and texture. Now the fun bit. Everything's cooked, so don't sweat over a tight seal. If you're feeling adventurous, you have the option to enrich the topping with 1 egg yolk, which will further help with browning, but take away a bit of the corn-forward characteristics of the pie. So it's up to you. What a fun dish. 200 oven, about 30 minutes. Now we have something sweet, savory, beautiful, and fun. I hope you give it a try. Oh my God, so beautiful.